This is a TalkStation original podcast.
On this week's episode of the Paper Boys podcast, JJ and I discuss sports topics in the news. We talk about ACC football and movie theaters, AI and sports reporting, and more. It all starts right now on the Paper Boys podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Paper Boys podcast. I'm JJ Smith.
And I'm Zack Nally.
We are joined, as always, by our producer, Ross Caraway. And also we are joined this week by no one.
We are all alone.
Just the three of us. Just the three of us.
I think it's nice that way.
Yeah.
We get to say whatever we want.
We started this podcast in June.
That's right.
So sports is pretty quiet in the summertime. You got baseball and that's about it.
Fishing?
Yeah. So we're getting close to September. Football, high school is here. College is coming up. NFL is coming up. You're going to blink and basketball is going to be here.
It's the best time of year.
Hockey's going, yeah, man.
It's all ahead of you.
Is ready to roll. So there's some stuff out there right now that's really interesting that we wanted to talk about. So we're going to hit a few topics today. One that Zach and I both noticed is this report from ESPN that they have announced a theatrical distribution agreement with Theater Sports Network for ACC regular season and college football games, meaning simply they are going to have college football games in theaters. You've got a situation where people are staying at home more because we have these amazing flat screen TVs. You can push pause on a game. You can fast forward through commercials. Use the bathroom, go outside, whatever. It doesn't matter. You're not spending mega money on tickets. You're not traveling. You're not getting home late on a Sunday night after an NFL game or, whatever. So the football stadium experience, I feel like people feel like it's lacking compared to what you can be at home.
Yeah, well, and I think specifically the comfort and the technology has been the biggest drivers for people not being in public spaces when it comes to entertainment. Like, I can sit on my couch. I have a nice sound system. I have a nice TV. What do I need the public space for? But as movies have come back to theaters, people who were I wasn't there, I wish I could have been, but people who went and watched Maverick. Didn't you go and see Oppenheimer recently?
I did. I've probably been to, and that leads right into that conversation is the streaming. We're not going to movies like we used to. We're not going to games like we used to because it's going to be out. The movie's going to be out in 2 months anyway. But that experience, I've probably been in the movies more in the past year than I had the previous 3 years. Thank you, pandemic. And it's a cultural experience that we're missing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it special when you're in there and people cheer or they cry together, they gasp together? There's an emotional component there, and I think with sports, more than just about any other facet of fandom, the emotional ties that come with being a fan, they're massive. And so being able to channel that into a group setting is special and something that you miss when you're at home. Usually you're by yourself. You might be with your family. You might have some friends over, and that is nice, but it's not the same as a large group.
Well, the streaming also has, taken away something. You and I disagree on this. You love when they dump everything at once. A television show. I love it when they do it one at a time because
I like to binge.
Right. I miss the communal experience. I think it's much better. Look at Succession, me and you on Sunday nights.
You're talking about like the water cooler shows where you show up the next day and you're like, can you believe what happened last night?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Back in the day, that was a thing. NBC had Thursday night programming. It was Friends and Seinfeld. And
I think Lost was like the first one where you came in, maybe Dallas or something, where you came in and you were like, oh my God, I can't believe what happened.
Right. And with binging, that's lost. None of us are watching the same thing anymore, except if you're watching HBO and something comes out on Sunday night, as Paul Rudd tells Jason Segel, and I love you, man. That premiere television, HBO it's not television. It's not television. It's HBO.
That's right.
And sports is where we still have that.
Yeah, you can watch sports. You can record it if your work schedule collides with it, or if you got something else going on. But for the most part, you're right. It's still very schedule based.
Yeah.
And you are watching. Plus, if you don't watch it in time, you struggle with, having to avoid spoilers online about what happens. I mean, my goodness, that's a trope we see everywhere.
Would you go to the movie theater and watch football?
I would. I think that there's a social capital to watching sports as part of an in-person group. You can turn around and high-five people and collectively cheer and stuff. And I'm not a huge crowd person. I say that I'm a Walt Disney World fan, but
too many people.
Too many people, especially when I'm trying to focus on something, is difficult. But I think a theater is a nice amount of people where It's not huge, but it's bigger than what could pack into your living room, certainly.
I love the idea of people getting together to watch games, even if it's not at the park itself. But the theater experience, it seems a little formal. You're sitting in these chairs, a sports bar.
It's definitely unnatural because you're in a tight space and it's probably a little bit dark in there.
Right.
And you brought up a sports bar. That's the thing I'm most interested in is the contrast between the difference between a sports bar and a theater. Sports bar, you've got multiple TVs everywhere. You're watching multiple games. The whole point is to take in everything that's happening in that moment on that day, sports-wise. And the TVs usually aren't that big, depending on which one you're looking at. At a theater, it's just going to be one game. So there's a singular everyone is here for this one specific game.
Right. I love the shots of like the World Cup or even college football or NFL or whatever, when it's a really big game, it's a playoff game or maybe even a championship, and they go to the hometown. They go to Kansas City during the Super Bowl, and they're all outdoors watching it on the one big screen or whatever, and they're just losing their mind anytime a big play. That's something you're missing when you're at home watching it on your TV.
It is. I do want to back up real quick and talk about how this came about. So this started with a father-son duo, Ron and Scott Dahl. They're from Salt Lake City, and they own the Theater Sports Network. They began this movement kind of last year, or earlier this year. They aired the 2023 Rose Bowl between Penn State and Utah at 5 Salt Lake City theaters. And it went well, and they wanted to try to make it national, so they went to ESPN, and I think ESPN owns all the rights to ACC. So they said, here's what you can have. This will be the guinea pig to see how this works. And so that's why we ended up, the ACC schools ended up being the recipient of this situation. I saw a story on WRAL where they were talking to a few different theaters in the Raleigh area. The Rialto Theater in Raleigh had held viewing parties for U.S. games during the Women's World Cup, and it was pretty successful. So it does seem like there's already a little bit of a precedent for people getting together at that kind of venue for an event like this.
Also, I feel like there's almost a community responsibility to attend movies or attend sporting events at movie theaters if we want to keep movie theaters a thing.
I certainly love them. I mean, my wife and I just went out of town to Raleigh, and we went and saw a couple movies. That's because they had the lounging electronic chairs, though, so that was pretty special.
I feel about movie theaters the way I feel about journalism. I tell people you'll miss them when they're going.
That's right.
I mean, like our community newspaper, it's something that almost not that you give them money because they deserve it, but it's almost like you give them money because we need them around. The movie theaters are not killing it these days.
No, and it makes sense with the health stuff during the pandemic. But I think we've seen a movement to come back to it on the movie side, and I think adding sports to it is interesting. They have it now where you can rent out these theaters for corporate presentations, for esports events. You and your buddies can bring a couple of PlayStations and have a blast with one of these theaters for like $100 a day, or $100 for like a 3-hour session.
You were telling me about birthday parties, right?
Yeah, you can like, I have a son that has sensory needs, and it would be great to allow him to, like, for $99 to rent an entire theater for a movie and let him run around as he pleases and make as much noise as he wants and not worry about bothering the person next to us.
It's amazing. If you go to the top 100 most watched U.S. TV broadcast of 2022, I'm on this Sportico website, and they have the top 100 by graphics of the balls or whatever else it is, and it's footballs. It's 1 through 100. There's got to be 90 footballs on here. The only number 7 is an American flag. That was political programming. And number 24 is an American flag. That's political programming. Everything else on the top 100 is a football.
People love their football. And, I mean, you look at the price of a ticket nowadays, especially an ACC football game, it averages around $50 to $60. I mean, you can go more expensive, obviously, but that's about the cost to see these games. And I think the company that is outsourcing this to these theaters is recommending a $30 charge for fans. I don't know if it's that big of a difference from one to the other. I mean, you might be a geographical thing. If I don't want to drive down to Greenville or Raleigh or Wake Forest or Chapel Hill, it'd be certainly a lot easier just to go to my local theater and watch this.
It's hard to blame people for wanting to stay home. I was watching the Notre Dame Navy game Saturday, and when I clicked on the game, DirecTV popped up a box and says, you can watch this in 4K if you want to.
Oh, wow.
Click on this and it'll take you to that channel. And oh my gosh, the difference was remarkable.
Yeah, and theater screens are limited in terms of their screen resolution and things like that, especially if you're, going to specific theaters at home or nearby or whatnot. I do have a question, though. You asked if I would go to one of these. Would you go to one of these?
I think I would just to
try.
Yeah. But I think I'd much rather be on an outdoor setting or a sports bar or something like that.
And here's a question I've got. You've been to live games. You've been to sports bars during games. I imagine that these theaters will not be filled with fans of one particular team.
Right.
It's going to be both teams.
Sure.
Things get a little bit wonky when it comes to
yeah,
sports.
That's true.
And if I'm stuck in a small room with these people, that's very interesting.
Elbow to elbow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the Panthers, but this is college football we're talking about. So
sure.
I have Carolina State fans elbow to elbow.
And play might happen that they don't like, and a couple guys start yelling. That's not where I want to be.
I think NFL would be much better just because of the communal. We're all rooting for the Panthers. That 2015 season, you probably would have wanted to seen it in places with other people multiple times.
Agreed. And I think unless I have a great seat, I'm going to a live game for the environment, but unless I have a great seat, I don't have an up close view of the action. Whereas in a theater, I've got a huge view, an up close view of the action. So that would be interesting.
I love the idea. I don't know about the execution.
Yeah, and I let's be honest too. We live here in Carteret County. Right. What are the likelihood that a theater around here is going to do this?
Sure, these are
maybe
big
a
cities.
Wilmington, a Raleigh, a Jacksonville, something like that. So, it'll be curious to see how this evolves.
Yeah, and also, not to get into it, but the regionality of college football, we're going to start losing that, and you'll wonder what kind of viewings and fan when NC State is playing Stanford in a conference game. We'll see what that looks like.
It's the Labor Day High Performance Doubleheader this weekend at Carteret County Speedway. 2 days of racing. Saturday, September 2nd, the Smart Modifieds Tour, sponsored by Mitchell Prime Properties, featuring Ryan Newman and Bobby Labonte. Sunday the 3rd, the Bowman Gray Stars return for Madhouse at the beach, sponsored by Priority One. Kids 10 and under, free. Military discount with ID, VIP, trackside, camping, and Moonshiners Restaurant. Green flag drops at 6 p.m. this Saturday and Sunday. Details on Facebook and tickets at CarteretSpeedway.com.
So with the movie screens, the movie theaters that we've seen with the ACC stuff, I think there's definitely a desire by people to engage with sports in a digital space. We've seen it with online gambling. We're seeing it with esports. There are more ways to engage with sports than just playing it or watching it in a live space. They've done studies on esports in particular. In August 2020, 61% of sports industry companies were engaging with esports. It's a $1.4 billion industry valued last year. Statista says 2.4 billion gamers. Just this morning, I was having a chat with our colleague Macy O'Donnell, and I was just curious about, when he was playing at ECU, how many of his teammates were playing video games, especially sports video games. He said probably 70-80%. It's very common, and I think that it's something that, whether or not it helps you as an athlete, it's certainly fun to engage in the thing that you play outside of actually playing it, and the same is for the fans as well.
Tyreek Hill says that's how he prepares for NFL games.
Look, there's something to be said about this. I know he was just kidding around and just messing with reporters, but there is something to be said about if you play Madden long enough, you might learn something about coverage. How a cover 3 zone interacts with certain plays. Then you learn with film, right? But Madden gives you a little bit more of a colorful, more creative approach to studying things like that. I would be shocked if sports like soccer and football don't benefit at least a little bit from playing video games. And not just like coordination and following eye tracking, stuff like that, but reading coverages, looking at the field holistically versus just from your position.
Well, for background, Tyreek Hill is a wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins, and he maybe had reporters going a little bit this week when he told them he never watches film, that he prepares for every Sunday by playing Madden.
Let me ask you something, JJ, Gen X colleague of mine. Do you play sports video games?
I have never played sports video games.
So as a sports reporter, I've played, as a gamer, as a millennial gamer, I've played lots of sports games. But as a sports reporter, one thing I like to do is when a season starts, I'll play those sports. There's no volleyball video games. I'm sure there's tennis and golf, but they're not my jam. But I'll play Madden for football. I'll play FIFA for soccer. In the winter, I'll play 2K for basketball. and then I'll play baseball games in the spring, and then back to soccer. It helps me kind of get into a headspace of covering those sports, and it allows me to learn some lingo that I wouldn't otherwise use. And I think it's an educational tool that is helpful.
It's a companion piece.
It is.
Well, look at the phone. I mean, I probably 5 years ago wasn't on my phone during games, and now I look at Twitter during football games as much as I do the television screen. I'm following what people are saying about every play. I don't know why I am so consumed with commentary on play-by-play by people around the country, but I am.
It's a blast, especially like those Scottish FIFA announcers. They're a lot of fun. But I think, even people who aren't sports fans, if they get into sports gaming, can find a relationship with sports they didn't have before. The Sport Journal, a guy named Dr. Daniel Kane, investigated last year whether sport video games helped college students become more interested in real-life sports, and it did. Overwhelmingly, those students wound up building connections to specific sports and teams and athletes, and it helped give them a relationship with sports they wouldn't otherwise have. Because, me personally, I learned how to play football in middle school by playing Madden. I learned what holding was. I learned what pass interference was in ways that a lot of coaches aren't willing to teach at that level.
Would you say as a teenager or maybe even in adulthood that you played sports video games more than you watched sports?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
There's a factor of control. I'm a direct involvement. I'm a direct player in this, participant, whereas when I'm watching sports, I'm just a viewer. I can manipulate the rules of the game. I can create a player that is 8 feet tall and Barry Sanders fast and hits like Ray Lewis and can just run over people. So
that's not surprising, because talking to high school coaches over the years, I can't tell you how many times they've told me that those kids in that sport don't watch those sports on TV.
No, it's especially because the gap between high school sports and pro sports is pretty high. It's very different. How they approach the game is very different. When you see these sports interviews or when you read stories about pro sports and you think that's what's important, and then you get to the high school level and it's not that. It's much more on a micro scale than a macro scale.
I used to talk to some basketball coaches, and the home team, one of our home teams would be up 15 with 3 to go, and they still be running and gunning, going up, shooting it as soon as they got it, and it would just drive me bananas. And after the games, I'd talk to the coaches. I'd be like, don't they understand, time and score, that you don't have to shoot? And he's like, don't they watch the games on TV? Don't they know you're not supposed? He was like, they don't watch sport. They don't watch basketball. They don't know that you're not supposed to run down. And they're used to just playing video games and going.
Yeah, what works there certainly doesn't work in real life,
yeah.
But that's part of it. And we have seen a decline in students or student athletes playing sports, kids playing sports, youth sports, whereas we've seen an increase in esports and sports video games usage. It's just, in 2018, I think New York Times reported only 38% of children ages 6 to 12 were playing team sports on a regular basis, where it was 45% in 2008. And then June 2020, 19% of parents with kids in youth sports said their kid was not interested in playing sports. By the next year, it was 28%. That's a third. A third of the kids in this country aren't interested in playing sports. How many of those kids are playing video games?
I listened to a coach recently, and I'd never heard anybody talk like this before, and I found it interesting. He was like, I think we're losing out on, obviously the next generation, the older generation never thinks the next generation is as tough as they were. But he was very pointed about, these kids aren't out very early ages climbing trees and falling and playing two-hand tag in the front yard or tackle in their shorts and T-shirts and stuff. And he said, I feel like by the time they get to high school, they haven't developed that toughness that I feel like they had back in the day. He said, and of course, it went right into this because they're in the house, they're on their phones, they're on their tablets, they're playing, video games.
Even the nature of sports has changed since back then. I mean, how we treat concussions in football, things like that, and how we treat safety, personal safety. So it definitely goes hand in hand. You're right. Me being a heavy gamer and who also played sports as a kid, I think there's room for both. I think that there is a benefit to playing video games and coordination, and I think that athletes who play video games probably benefit in some way. I think since 2017, they have found that pro athletes are 3 times as likely to play video games after the pandemic. Take a look at something like flight simulators or soldiers who use simulators before they go into certain war scenarios. It's a thing. Video games are a great platform to learn and train and develop certain skills that can't be developed outside of it.
I could see back in the day it not helping you out much. The arcade, the Atari, the early Nintendo, but now with Madden, you probably know as much as an NFL coordinator. The plays that are available, the schemes that are available, I would imagine is very educational for kids.
The way they approach these games now, they definitely want you to understand how to throw against a cover 2, how to throw against a cover 3, a prevent, a man-to-man, how to identify the blitz. If you play video games, it enhances your ability to watch a game. Now, I'm curious, did you ever play sports games when you were growing up back in the Atari days, Nintendo days?
Yeah, but those were pretty bad.
Sure, but Tecmo Bowl and those things, those were fun. EA Sports' NHL 94 or 98 was an awesome game. You could get together with your friends, and even though it looked like little bits on screen, you could still get something out of it. I was doing some research. Do you know the first sports video game to be made is by at that time a brand new video game company, Electronic Arts, which is now EA Sports in the game. It's very famous. 1983, they licensed Julius Erving's name and likeness and created a game for the Apple II computer called Dr. J and Larry Bird Go One-on-One.
Nice.
Which is pretty cool. And then 3 years later, they made the first John Madden football.
Madden has become a cultural thing. You watch NFL Live on ESPN, and the day the rankings come out, the players are on Twitter or they're on social media. They're mad if they didn't get the number they thought they should have got, or they're thrilled. And they're heavily invested in that game.
And this is not some guy sitting in a basement being like, okay, this guy has a 93 speed or a 90. No, this is based on incredibly complex algorithms and studies of physical and speed jumping tests, things like that. Our own colleague, again, to bring him up, Macy O'Donnell, was disappointed because I think this year is the first year that the new NCAA football game is going to come out, and he missed it by a year to be included in the game.
Oh, no.
So as a sports video game enthusiast, NCAA football, college football video game was probably the best representation of what it was like to play a sports video game. That stopped in 2014 when EA announced, or the NCAA announced, it would not renew its licensing contract with EA because of the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit, the UCLA lawsuit filed on behalf of all Division I football and men's basketball players. This was because they argued that the EA Sport, the game, the NCAA game, was making money on the image and likeness of players. Even though they didn't put the names on the jerseys in the game, they were benefiting. And, of course, now we see where the name, image, and likeness situation has gotten to. And now that it's been resolved, that game can come back out. But it's interesting to see how sometimes the politics of sports and video games intertwine.
What was your favorite game to play growing up?
Oh, it was Madden, 100%.
Yeah.
I don't have them anymore. I had notebooks filled because you could do fantasy drafts or franchise drafts where you could take all the players in the NFL and just put them all in one big group and then do a snake draft. So I would be Panthers' number 7 overall pick and then number 25 and so on and so forth. And you could get anybody you wanted on your team. And, of course, this was back in the Eddie George, Steve McNair. That was the Titans were my favorite Madden team back then. Video games have come a long way in sports, and the realism, the simulation ability of them now is extraordinary.
Just the evolution of having to play somebody in your room to playing somebody in California.
Anywhere you want in the world.
Yeah.
That's true.
In 1959, you could buy a new house on the coast for about $12,000, a new car for $2,000, and fill it up with gas for only 25 cents a gallon. Everyone was cruising the beach, listening to the Platters, the Coasters, and a young guy named Elvis. And when it was time to eat, they all ended up at L's Drive-In in Morehead City. For over 60 years, L's has been serving up our world-famous super burgers, shrimp burgers, oyster burgers, and our mouth-watering fried chicken and barbecue. This coastal tradition of great food and friendly and fun customer service means L's is proud to be serving our 3rd generation of regulars. And we're not done yet. Drive in and pick your spot under the old oak trees, next to the hospital in Morehead City. Then prepare your taste buds for a coastal tradition like no other, providing the best food, service, and atmosphere in Morehead City since 1959. L's Drive-In, next to the hospital in Morehead City.
So AI is in the news always, and people are scared to death it's going to be Skynet and kill us all. Isn't that what they're worried about?
I'm a millennial. I'm very excited. We're all, humanity's going down anyway. So
Just
let's have fun.
die to the robots.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand the issue here.
You want a good ending? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Are you telling me I can order pizza remotely with my mind here soon? That's
And the robot that delivers it might kill me? That's awesome. Put some danger in my pizza delivery.
Listen. In our house, Christina, my wife, has a steadfast rule. Whenever we are interacting with Alexa or Siri or ChatGPT, we are very polite. We say thank you. We say please.
Let the robots know you're on their side.
We are your friend.
So recently, the Columbus Dispatch used an artificial intelligence sports writing tool after a high school football game and did not go over kindly on the internets, as many things do not.
It looked terrible.
Yeah, Steve Cavendish on the Twitter machine, he's the editor of the Nashville Banner. He tweeted, "Yup, that's a Gannett paper running AI-generated high school football stories. Yup, it's terrible." And I would have to agree with Steve. Here's the story of Westerville North Warriors playing the Westerville Central Warhawks. I apologize in advance. The Westerville North Warriors defeated the Westerville Central Warhawks 21-12 in a Ohio high school football game on Friday. Westerville North edged Westerville Central 21-12 in a close encounter of the athletic kind at Westerville North High on August 18th in Ohio football action. Westerville North opened with a 7-0 advantage over Westerville Central through the first quarter. Okay, there's 3 sentences, and the word Westerville has been used 6 times.
They really want you to know this is who's playing.
It was Westerville, yeah. And it just goes downhill from there if that's possible. So, yeah, the Columbus Dispatch has paused that because
no doubt
it's so horrible. But AI is here, and it's here to stay. And just because they paused that doesn't mean it's not coming back and doesn't mean we're not going to see more of it.
What's your take on it?
Well, it's funny. You go to they have their own page, and it's called the Lead AI page, and it's story after story after story of high school football, and a lot of the leads are the same. I can't tell you how many times they say allows no points. Garfield allows no points against Cardinal in Ohio high school football action.
So let me ask you, if they were
Morgan allows no points against Riverview in Ohio's. It's like that over and over.
What if they were able to fix the vernacular to make it match?
Well, you think that'll probably happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of like an algorithm thesaurus or something, some way to plug in the right phrase based on an aggregate of how that phrase is used, on a broad national scale or whatever.
Well, you can bring it local. You sent me a track and field story in the spring.
So yeah, I'm a big proponent of AI, as JJ was joking around, and I've definitely messed around with things like ChatGPT and Otter AI voice transcribing and just a lot of different types of AI software, and it definitely struggles with presenting things that come across as human or as natural, as easy to read. I mean, one of the challenges we have as a journalist is taking information that is, in list form or whatnot and presenting it in a way that is easy to understand, easy to read. And AI is not quite there with that yet. You have to do a lot of doctoring up with it. And I'm sure, like any new technology, look at the original iPhone back in 2007. It was amazing, but it was pretty tough compared to what we had 10 years later. So I imagine within a 10-year frame, the AI's ability to write something that sounds more natural will be much, much better.
Tell us about that track and field story you did.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, you plug in prompts, and I'm sure that's not quite how the Columbus Dispatch is doing with it. I think they're probably using a program that automatically takes information from online and spits it out. But with the track and field story, I said, pretend you are a sports reporter for a newspaper and write a story about track and field results. And I gave it the results it needed. And I said, when you repeat a name, only give the last name, stuff like that. You can give certain parameters to make it sound a certain way. And it just, a lot of repeating. There were times when they would list names that were not part of the original data set that I gave it. So it is still very imperfect in its way to relay something that you've given it into a story.
I remember being very impressed though. You sent it and I was like, I don't know if I could have told the difference between that and a story.
Yeah. So, and again, this is this will be offensive, I think, to some degree, what I'm about to say, but a hot take here. Football is a tough thing to start this with. people are generally very invested and very interested in
Right.
how football stories are presented. Track and field, cross country, golf, tennis,
very
swimming,
name, score,
yes,
place,
box,
sports.
box score,
Yeah.
favorable sports. I think will be
Right.
a little bit easier to do that
Almost
without
like an agate or a box score.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Now my question though is, with something like that story, why couldn't it have just been a tweet?
Sure.
Why do you have to take the extra step to make it into a blog post or a story? Who's benefiting from that? Who's benefiting from a narrative form of information that you could just post as a simple, here's the score, and any other, rudimentary information that you might have to include, keeping it as basic as possible?
Well, I'm confused by, there's a big fear in many industries, journalism being one of them, that AI was going to take jobs. And I've always been like, I don't get it. AI, let's say we cover a football game on Friday night. We're going to capture sights, sounds. We're going to be there to take photographs. We're going to be there to talk to coaches. AI is not doing any of that. Now, somebody can be there on a computer and get all the stats and plug that into AI. And like you say, for ChatGPT, you always say, do something like, right? Write a movie like Steven Spielberg, write a story like, a famous journalist or whatever. So they could do that, but they're still not going to, you would have to somebody's got to be there.
Well, and for now, that is the case. You're right. A lot of these systems are using prompts, but I think the one they're using, and there's another one I'm going to mention here in just a second, they are pulling information automatically from the web and compiling it. And I think the advantage is that in a newsroom or in an environment where newsrooms have been drastically cut, this is a way to provide far more content than you would through just live journalism. Now, whether or not that content is quality or worth your time and or money, I think that's the big question here.
Well, and I say that I'm not worried because I figure somebody has to be there. But then, Zach and I cover spring sports, the diamond sports, baseball and softball, and for years now, I think everybody in the county has used Game Changer, except for maybe Croatan softball. I think it's maybe the only one. Croatan baseball used it. East and West baseball and softball, West and East baseball and softball. They all give us like their names, their passwords. They're all very generous with us. And here you can use it has more stats than you would ever want in your life. But the front page has an AI generated story, and it's not great, but it's not bad.
It's serviceable.
Yeah.
And I think if there's games you can't be at,
Sure.
and you could use, let's say, someone like you're covering a large county or a large area, large region, and you could pull in all these different stories from these places that you couldn't be at. Is that worthy of a reader's time?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, you're losing something though.
You are. But I mean, if you can't be there anyway,
That's true.
that's the question. So there's a website here in Argentina, or it's a publication, Diario Huarpe, which covers a population of about 750,000. And they only have sports reporters on the weekends. And obviously there's lots of football stuff there, lots of soccer stuff. They are publishing 250 automated sports stories per month using a service called United Robots. It uses AI and what they call natural language generation or natural language processing to produce automated text reports, images, graphics, and maps for newsrooms. They also do approximately 3,000 weather articles per month. They are pumping out content using this AI because their newsroom is limited to a weekend sports reporter.
And there you see the benefit, but also, we're in an industry that's getting sliced and diced every day. The Columbus Dispatch that did this is part of a large newspaper chain called Gannett, and they have cut, here's a New York Times story from last December where they cut 6% of the company's 3,400 U.S. media division. So Gannett is always cutting. So when you're replacing real people with machines, that's an issue.
It is, especially if you're relying on them to provide stories specifically. I do think there's a way to fold in AI, and I'm sure it's already being done. I'm sure we do it without realizing that we are doing it, into the way you cover sports. Sure. That works. One thing we've seen in the past few years, and not just in sports, but election coverage, regular news articles, fact-checking algorithms. A way to increase the efficiency of a newsroom by allowing artificial intelligence to check your facts, recognize phrases, and make sure that you are speaking truth when you write your articles. In sports specifically, there's a lot of data-driven sports journalism things that can be used using AI. So advanced statistics, data visualization tools, all things to provide deeper insights into the sport in addition to what you as the human covering it can provide.
I think we all have decisions to make, whether we are inside an industry that's using AI or we are consumers. You know, you go to Food Lion and now they're loaded with the self checkouts, and you're like, do I choose that? Or do I choose to go through a line and wait a little bit where a human being can wait on me and maybe I help keep that person's job? In every industry, in every area of life, I think we're making these decisions. How much do we want automation to take over and how much do we want to have human contact?
Yeah, and I think there's a line between replacing jobs with AI, which is probably not a good idea, and using AI to harness a human's ability to do things faster and more efficiently. So like if I go through a regular checkout line, why are they grabbing items hand by hand and scanning them? That's weird. Let it pass under a laser scanner so that when it goes down the conveyor belt, it's automatically rung up, compiled, they bag it up, I pay, and I go. Just ways to use it that doesn't replace the human there, but makes their job faster and more efficient.
But it is probably going to get to the point where we are replacing humans with these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to happen, and there are some jobs that people do which, are difficult and dirty and dangerous, and there are opportunities to improve safety and with using AI. So it's not all bad and it's not all good.
It's something we're going to be talking about for a long time.
Yeah.
It's the Labor Day High Performance Doubleheader this weekend at Carteret County Speedway. 2 days of racing. Saturday, September 2nd, the Smart Modifieds Tour, sponsored by Mitchell Prime Properties, featuring Ryan Newman and Bobby Labonte. Sunday the 3rd, the Bowman Gray Stars return for Madhouse at the beach, sponsored by Priority One. Kids 10 and under, free. Military discount with ID, VIP, trackside, camping, and Moonshiners Restaurant. Green flag drops at 6 p.m. this Saturday and Sunday. Details on Facebook and tickets at CarteretSpeedway.com.
So with AI coming in and changing how we cover sports, how we look at sports, it's hard not to notice the other ways in which sports coverage has changed, sports journalism. You've been at this job for 15 years, and what you do now to cover sports, is it different than what it was when you first started?
Yeah, I remember, God bless his soul, Craig McClanahan, didn't we love him? He would fax tennis results.
Wow, that is old.
How long have I been doing this?
Jeez.
But yeah,
back in the Reagan days.
Yeah,
no.
he would fax them over all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no faxing anymore.
So I remember when I first started, there was definitely a thing where I would have to call people up and get stats from the game if I wasn't there.
Oh, well, to keep it in Wes Carter's territory, Robert Lancaster, there were times where he would bring by this huge, do you remember the huge stat sheet?
I do.
It was like a foot long.
It was huge.
Yeah, and he would cover the football games, and he was probably maybe the all-time great statistician in Carteret County history. Him and Don Capel at East Carteret. But it was covered in pencil. And then he'd call you, and then he'd be like, "This is where I messed up," and he was just so meticulous about it. But there were times where he would be on the road, he'd be going like an ECU football game, and we'd be on the phone for
sure.
And it was on the phone.
Yeah, I remember having to call somebody on Saturday mornings at Croatan. I don't remember
Robert Geiges.
That was his name.
He was at Flip Flops convenience store.
Yes.
And he'd say, "I'm sorry," because you'd hear the door ring.
Yep.
He'd be like, "I got a customer." How many times did you have to do that?
30 seconds, he'd come back. "All right, I'm back. Here's what we got. Number 4,
yep.
Braden so-and-so.
Yep.
34 rushes.
Ding. Somebody's coming in.
Hang on a second. I mean, it would be 20 to 30 minutes on the phone.
Absolutely.
Just to get these stats, which, whatever. Human interaction is great. It's very different now.
We talk to nobody.
No. Whoever created Max Prep Sports.
Oh, God bless.
I hope that I hope that you have the cool side of your pillow every night, because truly without that, I don't know. It's just much more difficult without it.
It's night and day.
It really is. Yeah. I can go on there and not just see what the person did the night before or the team did the night before, but how it's looked for the whole season.
Yeah.
I can the roster, the schedule, everything historically. How has this football team's rushing yards per game changed since 2008?
Yeah.
Of course, it only goes back so far, usually 2004, 2005.
We had a reader from Swansboro reach out. He had moved to the area, and he loved baseball, and he wanted to follow. And I just sent him Max Preps for Swansboro. I sent him the link to Max Preps, Swansboro's roster page, their schedule page, their stats page. I was like, dude, you can check in
it's all
Swansboro
right there.
baseball all you want.
Yep.
Schedule, so you know when to go to games. And back in the day, I wish I could remember the name of it. I wish we had a soccer coach in here right now. Soccer had a page. It was NC Soccer something. And
NC Soccer Coaches Association, maybe?
No, it was, I can't remember the name of it, but it was Max Preps,
Oh, I
Preps.
see. You know what? I do remember this when I
Yeah.
first started.
And wrestling had like NC Mat.
That's right.
They have something now, track wrestling. We're not as big as fans of track wrestling.
It's nice
as
to have a
we are,
resource,
but
though.
It is. So there were inklings back in the day, but Max Preps is just a whole
Yeah,
other
and
level.
you see like something like a NC Mile Split or a track wrestling where it's not quite as good as a Max Preps, and it makes a difference in the length of time it takes for you to investigate things or look for trends and things like that.
And you pass along a fascinating article from the LA Times. It was 1993, and just talking about how sports coverage was broadening and pivoting and all this different stuff. And now social media, if you're at a game, you have to tweet about it.
It's no longer a thing where maybe you're good at it, or it would sure be nice if you had a Twitter presence or a Facebook presence. No, it's a required element of sports coverage now.
If you don't tweet the score after a game, people will reach out to you on Twitter and be like, "What's the score?" Like they're adamant, like they deserve to know. They want to know right now, what is the score? Tell me.
They do. And I mean, I've also found another article here from Indiana Bloomington, and a young man was talking about how the old way of sports journalism was gather, sort, report. So you go out, you get the information you need by covering the game, you go home, you sort the data, the stats into what you need for the story, and then you write the story. Now, to some degree, we still do this.
Absolutely.
But the new model is gather, report, sort. So you go to the game to get your information. If you find out that somebody has been injured, you want to tweet that out. If you, as soon as the game is over, before you've ever written anything, tweet out the score. There's even models where you might go and tweet, blog, story, send the tweet out of what happened, do a short story to get online immediately out that happened, and then write a story that can run in print and online.
You're live reporting these days.
You are. The idea is that you're competing with multiple venues.
Right.
And if you're in a market that attracts a national media coverage, then you're certainly up against the wire.
Sure.
Here in Carteret County, we're usually not competing with anybody else.
I remember one of the first times I did that, might have been the first time I did that, was the year that the East Carteret boys basketball team went undefeated, and they were going to play Winston-Salem Prep in the state championship game. And I think the practice the day before or a couple of days before, Jock Brown, who was their star, fell at practice and hit his head. And I kind of started reporting from that live. I was tweeting about it and letting people know, and people started gaining traction. And I remember some East Carteret crowd was not real pleased with me that I was announcing that he had his injury. But I think that's like 2015. So now you're talking about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
That's how long we've
Imagine even an event like Big Rock from,
Absolutely.
say, 15 years ago, where you would wait till the following morning to find out what happened the night before. Now everyone's watching live. You're not just keeping track of tweets. You're watching live video. It's not uncommon for us to cover large sports events like state championship games for them to be broadcasting live or taking videos and sending them out immediately. During the pandemic, we had the NFHS network start to rise in popularity. Schools were installing Pixelot cameras so that you could watch the games from at home. So now you really can watch these games live. Regular high school games, volleyball, soccer, football, you can all watch them live now with these cameras in this network.
And how often do you see people live tweeting games, which I, to this day, maybe it's just because I'm old, I don't understand the benefit of giving people play-by-play. But that's the thing.
The only benefit I see from it personally is that I can now go back and draw a story from that information if I'm not able to be there, which is nice.
I just don't know what I'm giving to the reader when I'm giving him the play-by-play of a game. Why is he going to go? Why does he need to read my story if I'm giving him the play-by-play of a game?
That's true too. But it begs the question of whether or not game reports are something that we're going to see in the future.
Yeah.
I still think they're fun to read. People who read our stuff still enjoy them.
Well, there's your AI right there.
It is something. But I think AI, if you're not there, there's something about the sights and the sounds and the specifics of a game that we are able to see and report on.
Absolutely.
If there's a fight that happens,
Right.
a huge brawl,
Right.
AI is not going to know that happened.
Well, if you're, just go the hokey route, and if you're covering a high school baseball game and a rainbow appeared before the ninth inning and the team was down and all of a sudden they made a comeback and won, there's your lead right there.
That's right. Or, prayer at the end of a football game, what have you. Little elements of high school, college, what have you, sports that are worth reporting about.
Sights and sounds.
That's right.
Yeah. And, some of the other changes is not just the media and social media and live reporting and stuff. It is a detour from traditional newspapers and traditional media sites. You have a lot of online presence now. You have a lot of people doing their own things, blogs, and here in our own state, we have plenty.
Yeah. I mean, you look at things like high school OT, NC Prep Sports, WRAL, and national level, you've got The Ringer, one of my favorite websites, Sports Illustrated, SI.com, The Athletic, Yahoo Sports, you could argue transformed, or one of the major pioneers of transforming sports from a strictly print to a almost strictly digital space. 247 Sports, The Bleacher Report. It's not uncommon to see these organizations report on sports. Now we're seeing independent people. When I went and covered the New Bern Havelock football game last year, I was shocked at the number of people who were there from Greensboro, from Wilmington, from Raleigh, who weren't part of a traditional publication, but were there as independent freelancers who have a website, and they follow the juice. They go where the most important, most talked about game is, and they take videos, they write a little blog about it, and that's their coverage.
This other story from the LA Times, it was 1993, talks about the evolution of newspapers weren't just covering football or boys basketball, covering other sports, and especially girls sports, which did not get a lot of ink back in the day, and now is right on par with the boys sports.
Yeah, it's shocking as someone who's been started this in 2013 that non-revenue sports didn't used to be covered, that it was just football, men's basketball. Ever since I've started here, the News Times, it's been crucial that we, especially if they're on a field, or in a court or in a public space where there's viewership, there's spectators, that we're going to be there to cover it, and we're going to cover them all pretty fairly. But you're right, that wasn't a thing back then.
And you can see numbers, not just us locally, but nationally. The women's March Madness has just exploded. I think it was up like 81% from in 2022 compared to 2021, and the NWSL soccer was up like 400%. WNBA is up 25% year over year. They're breaking records. They just had the Women's World Cup, which everything is setting records in women's sports.
I mean, financially, if I'm looking for growth in sports, women's sports have to represent the biggest chunk of growth possible.
And that's another area where, talking about money, sponsorship for women's sports and girls sports is also going through the roof.
Yeah, and we're seeing unique events. What was the article you saw just the other day about
Nebraska? I mean, they've got a cool thing going on where they're going to host a volleyball match in the Memorial Stadium, the football stadium, and I think the record for women's volleyball college match is like 18,000 people, and they're hoping to get over 90,000 people.
Wow, that's tremendous.
For women's college volleyball.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, that kind of like a niche sport.
Yeah. When you add a lot of spectators to just about any sport, it makes it exciting, even at a local small level. When I've covered volleyball games, I think back to West Carteret and their playoff run from a few years back, where they packed the gym, and it made for an entire. It felt like a basketball game. It was very much had the same energy when normally it doesn't have that because of the spectatorship.
They're hoping to set a world record for a women's sporting event. The record is 90,185. That was the Rose Bowl. That was the 99 World Cup with U.S. and China. I think that was Brandy Chastain, I think.
That's right.
The other one is Barcelona and Wolfsburg women Champions League match. That was about 91,000. So, yeah, it's going to be wild to see over 90,000 people watching a volleyball match.
Yeah, with all the change we've seen in sports coverage over the last decade, 2 decades, and with the advent of AI being roped in, I'm really curious to see how sports coverage is going to change over the next decade or two.
I was going to say, look at how far it's come in the last 10 years. What's the next?
It's certainly going to look a lot different.